What was his offense? He refused to lie. Welcome to Freedom Alive. The Trump administration is working to eliminate all diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas from the workplace. But it seems the American Library Association hasn't taken note. In fact, taxpayer-funded public libraries proudly offer services, materials, and programs that reflect LGBTQ ideology. And if they don't comply, it's considered censorship. Pastor Luke Ash joins us today to share how he has been a victim. I'm blessed to again be joined by our co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, little did I ever imagine that pronouns would be such a volatile subject in our culture today. Now the issue of compelled speech surrounding gender confusion and the use of pronouns has become front and center.
Who would have ever thought that there's over 100 different so-called pronouns? Pronouns that you can't even imagine. They're just fictitious, made up. You know, we have pronouns. We're familiar with those in elementary school. We're taught, you know, he, she, it, they, them, their, those kinds of things. But now what we have is this idea that gender doesn't really matter. It's all a construct of your mind. There's no objective biological reality to it. And you can create yourself in your own image, irrespective of the fact that God created us in his image. You can be your own creator and create your own image and therefore invent your own pronoun.
Remarkable the consequences that he's faced. We cannot wait to bring this episode to you, but our Freedom Alert, brought to you by Liberty Counsel, is next.
Seattle denied free speech for a Christian event. Liberty Counsel filed a lawsuit against the city of Seattle, the mayor, and chief of police on behalf of Christian organizers for a grassroots revival event called May Day USA. The city denied the May Day organizers a permit to peacefully assemble at a traditional downtown location due to its religious message. Instead, the city steered the event to a park in a predominantly LGBTQ community where violent attacks were made toward the group. The plaintiffs seek a permanent injunction restraining the city from continuing its unlawful permitting process that violates free speech, religious exercise, peaceable assembly, and equal protection. The city's unconstitutional permitting scheme cannot withstand First Amendment scrutiny and causes irreparable harm to free speech.
Up next, Matt's interview with Pastor Luke Ash.
I'm pleased to welcome a special guest to Freedom Alive, Pastor Luke Ash from Louisiana. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Pastor Ash.
Good morning. So good to be with you, Matt.
Well, I want to talk to you about your situation with regards to a library and pronouns that they were coercing you to use, preferred pronouns. But before we get to that, Luke, tell us a little bit about your background. You're in Baton Rouge Parish in Louisiana. We'll talk a little bit about the East Baton Rouge Public Library there and your experience. But let's get a little background about who you are. You're a pastor. You're also a singer-songwriter as well.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, my family, we lived in a camper and traveled the country for about 2 years playing music. And that was an evangelistic ministry that we did for a couple of years. We put out an album in 2017 under Luke and Emily. And it's more of a conversation starter. It's not so explicitly Christian, browbeating people over the head with the Bible, but definitely the love songs and songs about life.
That's quite a commitment to travel in a camper RV around the country for 2 years to sing from place to place. And do you still do that? Do you still do special music and praise and worship at different locations?
Yeah, we do from time to time. We haven't as much because just all the other things that the Lord has us in. But I still write songs, and even from the pulpit, will occasionally sing songs that I've written. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got to put a passage from Ephesians to music, and I got to sing that from the pulpit. So that was it's just a way to kind of keep that fresh. It's just part of who I am.
And currently, you're lead pastor at the Stevendale Baptist Church, located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. How long have you been at that church?
So my start date, I believe, was March the 1st. It was the first Sunday in March was my first Sunday. We had just moved back to Louisiana. This is where my wife and I are both from here. We were living in Indiana in the Fort Wayne area for about 5 years. And then we moved back to Louisiana to be near family, but also because I had this opportunity to come down and to serve Stevendale Baptist Church.
So you also were the former library technician at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. How did you get interested in a job as a library technician?
Well, before we ended up moving to Indiana, I worked in Louisiana libraries before. It was an opportunity just right out of college. I got a degree from LSU in general studies, and just starting a family and just trying to find any kind of job that was nearby and something that I could do to support my family. And so I worked at the library in Livingston Parish. And I really enjoyed my time there. I got to be involved in the music programs. Started an open mic at the library, which may sound, odd to have music in a place where they is famous or infamous for shushing people. But we had in the back room in the nights whenever it was slow, we would invite people to come and to use the talents that the Lord had given to them to just hone those gifts. And I did a variety of programs in that way. And so I hoped whenever we moved back to Louisiana that if I could get involved in the libraries, it's a way of helping people and serving the community potentially, and then specifically to be able to use some of the gifts that I have musically as well.
So you have some famous people, obviously, from Louisiana. Tony Perkins with Family Research Council, Speaker Mike Johnson, Representative Steve Scalise. So there's a lot of good friends that I know are from Louisiana. And one of the great individuals that work at Liberty Counsel from Louisiana, actually two of them, that were raised in Louisiana. So I'm very familiar with that area. I want to get into your library work, though, because now you're working as a library technician at this East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Were you aware of some of the policies that you later encountered when you first became employed? And was it obvious that this particular library had some of these woke policies, particularly regarding pronouns?
Well, I knew that the library was a place that attracted people who had diverse perspectives. And I, being a musician, and before the Lord, the Hound of Heaven tracked me down, I was playing music in bars and clubs, and just very used to being around people with diverse perspectives. So that didn't bother me. If anything, I felt like it would give me an opportunity to be a light in that space. But I did not know about the inclusivity policy specifically, or some of the in-house DEI initiatives that they had going on. And I wouldn't have had a way of knowing that until I got hired on. I found the inclusivity policy after I started working there. I was looking for a different policy about taking time off to maybe go up to see the LSU Tigers play in the College World Series. And as I was looking for that, that's whenever I found the inclusivity policy. And I was shocked to see it there. Yeah.
So what is that? It's a DEI type of policy, diversity, equity, inclusion type of policy. What essentially did it say?
Well, I'd have to go back and look at the exact verbiage again. But it talks about the library being a diverse place and a place that is safe for all kinds of different ethnicities and religious points of view, and sexual preferences. And then it goes on to, even though it says that there's an allowance given for all different kinds of religious perspectives, which I would hope that would include mine as well. Right underneath that, it talks about people having the ability or the right, I would have to go back and see the exact verbiage, to be called by the pronouns that they choose to be called.
So now you are working there for how long before you actually are confronted with this pronoun issue?
My hire date, I believe, was, again, I would have to go back and check. I think it was about a month after I got here at Stevendale Baptist Church is whenever I landed the job at the library. And then in July the 10th is whenever I was fired. And
what happened leading up to that?
So on July the 7th, I was in a conversation with a coworker about somebody that she was training, so her trainee. And I asked her if she was going to be training the trainee on the desk on the following day. And she said no, and they prefer he. And I said, I don't do that. And she said, you don't use preferred pronouns? And I said, no, I don't do that. And she said sarcastically, well, that's very respectful. And I just said, yes, that's very respectful. And then I just backed out of that conversation and moved on to do something else. And then the next day I was shown the inclusivity policy. I was brought into the office with 3 managers and shown the inclusivity policy. They asked me if I was willing to change my stance. And I said, no, I'm not going to lie. And they said that they'd never had anybody refuse to use preferred pronouns before. And so they would have to get back to me and talk with the upper management to see how to move forward. And 2 days later, on Thursday the 10th, I was fired.
And did they tell you why you were fired?
They did. They said that I did not fit the culture, and specifically having to do with the pronouns.
So you have a female there. That's obviously the person was female, and this other person that was a coworker referred to the female as a plural pronoun. They want to be referred to as he, which in itself just doesn't make sense. They as plural want to be referred to as singular, but a different pronoun than their actual biological birth sex. And they were astounded that you were the first person that ever raised that question. That's astounding to me, that they live in certain kind of a bubble, that they don't even think about whether this is logical, scientific, or whether it makes any sense at all.
Sure. Yeah, that was surprising to me as well, especially knowing that I'm not the only Christian there. I'm not the only evangelical Christian there. And so the fact that I have no idea how long this policy has been on the books, but the fact that I was the first person to have an issue with that was surprising to me.
Does it mean that there's other people, you said there's other evangelical Christians that work there? Are they just going along with the policy and referring to people by whatever preferred pronoun they want?
I think in some cases that is true. There are some Catholic friends who work in the same department where I was, and they told me about stories where they felt bullied into taking that position and using that compelled language. And in some cases, some people have been working in the library for a long, long time and have all their retirement and those kinds of things. So I could see where there would be a lot of pressure to maintain that. In other situations, maybe some Christians haven't had to have any run-ins with people who are claiming to be a transgender person. So,
well, I could understand that there's people that work there that agree with you that this is just nonsense and it's not biblical, and frankly, it's a lie to actually refer to somebody by a pronoun that you know doesn't represent them. biologically, but they don't say anything. I can't imagine that they just accepted all of this whenever they made these changes. Before this policy came into being, they just referred to people by their natural pronouns. Then the policy comes into being, but these people don't say anything because they're afraid, obviously, of their jobs because of their retirement that they might have in the public library system or the public employment system.
Yeah, that's correct. So it's hard to it's hard not to have compassion for those who want to keep their jobs, want to continue to provide for their family. But I think one of the things that has given me strength to move forward and to take principled stands in life is the fact that I did live in a camper for 3 years. I know that the Lord will take care of me and my family. And so, and you know, just being able to read a little bit and about these particular situations that could happen and play those kinds of thought experiments ahead of time, so that whenever I was faced with this particular challenge, I knew what the Lord would want me to do.
Yeah, I know. It just seems, you know, you have to live with yourself. You have to wake up every day and have a clear conscience and have a life of integrity. And a paycheck, you know, if that is contradicting that, then give up the paycheck, because the Lord's going to take care of you in one way or another. Stand for truth and stop lying. In your situation, the library obviously had this pronoun policy that just makes no sense. And frankly, the trend, it seems like, thankfully, not everywhere, but the trend is going the other way, rejecting those DEI type of policies and these false pronouns. But it's still deeply embedded all over different places. But thankfully, hopefully, the pendulum is swinging the other way. But this library, not only, if it has these pronoun policies, what is it doing in other ways with regards to the LGBTQ agenda? Books, other kinds of things. Are they providing censorship of different kinds of books that they don't like? Are they actually promoting LGBT books that they probably do like?
Yeah, I think it's very clever the way that the library talks about book banning and that sort of thing. Because if Christians come and they see a book in the children's section or the teen section of the library that is clearly promoting values that are antithetical to Scripture and the flourishing of society, then the Christian will be accused of being somebody who bans books, and we'll be reminded that it was the Nazis who wanted to ban books, and it's never the right people on the right side of history that decide to ban books. But what the library can do, and the way that they limit access to books, is they don't put the Christian books or the books that promote biblical values, they don't put those front and center in the displays, or they refuse to purchase those books altogether and force their patrons to get books from other libraries that will carry more conservatively minded books.
So did you see that happening in your library?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my first days on the job, the same coworker that I was in the conversation with, who I would imagine reported me to the administration about refusing to use preferred pronouns, that same person was telling me about how excited they were that our library didn't carry Pete Hegseth's books, and that if patrons wanted to get some of his books, they would have to get it from another parish close by.
So that's interesting. You got a library that's supposed to be a repository of a lot of information, and they promote themselves, particularly the American Library Association, about how they're so much in favor of free speech. But they don't want to carry the book that was written by the now Secretary of the Department of War, formerly the Department of Defense. And they're proud that they don't carry that particular book by the Secretary of War. Yes. And I think that the book that he wrote about classical Christian education is something that I think that a lot of parents would want to read in particular, as well as the other things that he's written. But if there's that case, then surely there are others as well. Yeah, so they're actually intentionally not buying books. and then they're using government money to buy other books that are more liberal, radical, DEI, LGBTQ. Did they do anything to promote the LGBTQ type of books or LGBTQ type of agendas, like drag queen story hours or anything like that?
They didn't have Drag Queen Story Hour in the East Baton Rouge Parish Library that I'm aware of. I think that issue in particular has garnered enough attention that, like you said, the pendulum is swinging in the right direction for that kind of a thing. But as far as promoting LGBT books and DEI kinds of things, you can just go into the library and see that all over the place. But that didn't just happen by chance. There are trainings that employees have to take quarterly, and some of those trainings are about selecting certain kinds of books that are LGBTQ plus friendly. And so the acquisition of certain books is promoted as long as it's going to be friendly to the party line. So
you wonder, I've wondered by some of these books that are written by these authors that are very pornographic almost in nature, and some of those are just disgusting in how they're promoting all kinds of sex at an early age, how they actually are subsidized, but it makes a lot of sense now what you're talking about. It may not be the general public is out there buying these books, although they certainly must have an audience for it. But if you take all of these libraries across the country, and they're investing all these government dollars to actually subsidize and prop up some of these publishers and authors that are making these books, and they're filling these libraries with this trash, it makes sense how these book authors and these publishers are able to survive in an environment like we have today.
Yes, and it's possible that the libraries are the reasons why some of these publishers are able, like you said, to even stay alive, because there are connections between the libraries and the publishers. And there are some books that are only purchased because they're promoted by the publishers, and it doesn't really matter what the records are as far as how popular that book may be. Mm-hmm. It will still be purchased by the library if it fits a certain agenda.
So look, you gave me an idea as we're just thinking here. Obviously the Drag Queen Story Hour can be a very visible situation, and so you're going to notice that. It's going to attract attention. So just because your library is not doing that, you might think, well, my library is okay. Well, they may not be doing it because they don't want to put a bullseye on themselves, if you will. They don't want to attract attention. They don't want to set off the alarm bells with that Drag Queen Story Hour, which is going to attract the community's attention. And then the community will look into more issues. What is this library doing besides the Drag Queen Story Hour? Just because your library is not doing it, then I would encourage people that are viewing this to go into your local public libraries. Go into your local public libraries and look at what is being purchased, what's not there, and what's actually being displayed and promoted. It would seem like if people did that and then started raising their concerns about what's in these public libraries, even going to the, county commission, city commission, which is controlling, they have the ability to make policies regarding these things. They should be able to find out what's happening in these libraries and then bring this out to the public light.
Absolutely, and that's actually what's happening in Lafayette, and then also in Livingston Parish. The communities are starting to get involved, and you might be surprised. You might think that you're just a single person going through and kind of vetting books, and you might think that your voice doesn't matter. But I just want to encourage you that doing the right thing, choosing, I'm not going to live by lies, and I don't want my children to have access to these kinds of things. Your voice will count, and you can go to these library board meetings in most cases, and you can write letters to the administration, and I think that your voice will be heard. So do that. Go into your local library and see if there are books there that you don't think are appropriate, and see what can happen.
I think what you have to think about is God created us in His image, male and female. He created us in His image. And that this idea that you can have whatever pronoun you want to have, that is inconsistent with how God created you as male or female, then what you are essentially doing is saying God made a mistake. God made a mistake and He put you in the wrong body, and therefore I can recreate myself in my own image. And that is outright rebellion against God, who created us in His image, male or female. And what this movement is, this LGBTQ agenda with regards to false pronouns, is essentially the abolition of gender. Gender doesn't matter. It's only a construct of your mind. And sometimes God makes a mistake, and therefore you create yourself or recreate yourself in your own image. That is outright rebellion against God, who is our creator. So when you participate in false pronouns, you are enabling somebody to continue to be in a rebellious situation, thinking that they can create themselves in their own image. And in fact, I think we have to speak constant truth. Love, yes, always, but always truth. And the truth will set you free. Luke Ash is our guest, pastor of the Stevendale Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Thank you for joining us, Luke, on Freedom Alive.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's a pleasure to meet you and talk with you.
Matt, it's been remarkable to watch this pronoun issue roll out over recent years and how hotly it's contested, the absurdity of it, the confusion that it's created, the outright lie that it is. Like, what's, for folks at home, what's really behind this agenda?
Well, what's behind the agenda is the abolition of gender. If you think about it, if pronouns don't matter, you can make up your own pronoun, and you can change your pronoun gender to be something opposite, or create something that has no gender at all. What are you trying to do? You're trying to overcome how God made you as a male or female and create yourself in your own image. So that's really the ultimate objective of the LGBTQ agenda. I said this years and years ago, that that's where this was headed. And why is that? Because gender has a certain construct. You're either male or female, and there are certain kinds of obvious things that go along with that. And in order to abolish the very notion of it, you have to abolish gender.
With every episode of Freedom Alive, we love to bring the truth of what's really happening with these issues into your home so that you and your family can make the best decisions. In closing, remember Isaiah 59, verse 15, which says, "Truth is nowhere to be found, and whoever shuns evil becomes a prey." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us here next time. You'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.